Soo Song, Director of Projects and Initiatives at SETDA. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Why is the work of the EDSAFE AI Alliance so critical at this moment?
So I represent SETDA, which used to stand for the State EdTech Directors Association. But you know how like the SATs don't stand for an acronym anymore. We're just SETDA now because it was kind of a misnomer. Not every state has an EdTech director, so we figured let's just go by SETDA. But in any case, we're a professional association that represents EdTech leaders from state education agencies primarily. And we've been doing an annual survey with our members for about 3 years now, trying to get a sense of like where their pain points are and what are their concerns, what are their priorities. And as you can imagine, over the last 2-ish years, AI has been a big, both an opportunity and a pain point for them, right? We've seen a huge increase in our members that say, hey, districts are asking for more guidance from us on good practice. We've also seen a growth in the number of states saying, hey, we're trying to think about what statewide initiatives we can pull off. Is it like grants for districts to procure AI tools? Is it a statewide professional learning community, right? So by being a part of EdSafe, we're able to get insights into like what's happening in other parts of the country, what's happening at the federal level that would influence our state members, right? And that's been a super helpful part of being a part of EdSafe, right? And before this role, I was at the U.S. Department of Education's Office of EdTech. And when it came to AI and digital equity issues, we spoke about it from 3 different perspectives, right? And the potential for another sort of like digital divide that AI has potential to cause, right? When it comes to, hey, all of these AI tools are, on a web platform. So if you don't have foundational, connectivity access, you're kind of falling behind already, right? So how do we bridge that gap? Second, the cost of using some of these more powerful tools, right? We see some universities doing some great work to cover the cost of getting access to some premium tools. But if your community doesn't have access to those tools because of the cost of everything, again, that sets you up to fall behind a little bit. And then the AI literacy piece is another cost for concern when it comes to the potential for another digital divide. So again, EdSafe has been a great way to just like learn more about with each of these issues that our members care about, and also the things that we talked about at the U.S. Department of Ed. How do we bridge these gaps to make sure that all students don't just simply become consumers of AI developed content and platforms and things like that, but become creators in a new society and economy. So yeah, that's been a super helpful part for us. Yeah.
What are some ways that you've been involved with EdSafe and the SAFE framework?
Yeah, I've been primarily working with the U.S. Policy Working Group, which has been super helpful, especially in the last couple of months, as there's been a lot of changes at the federal government, just trying to get up to speed on like what should we know that we should communicate to our members about, so that they can stay up to speed and sort of like adjust their actions, as needed, right? So that's been helpful. And then over the last couple of weeks, it's been good to sort of collaboratively work on sort of a legislative definition of what AI literacy can and should be. And I think I mentioned that trend survey that we do with our members, carrying over some of the lessons learned from that survey into developing that collaborative definition of AI literacy has been a way that we can advocate for our members as well. So that's been good. Sort of like a two-way, way to engage with the group. Yeah.
What do you feel are some of the biggest challenges that exist around safe and equitable AI currently?
Yeah, I think I mentioned the issue of digital access in a previous question, right? A lot of these, especially the generative AI tools, are, at the end of the day on a web server, right? So that has been a challenge that I've been thinking about with regards to our students, right? During the pandemic, there were programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program, the Emergency Connectivity Fund, and ESSER funds that help bridge that at-home digital access divide. But all of those pandemic-era programs have sunsetted in the last year. So how do we make sure that when students, go off campus, they still have access to these powerful tools that become really critical for their learning in this new society and economy, right? So that's something that, is something that our members have been, thinking about, the access piece. The second piece is around, it's not the sexiest term, but procurement, right? Our districts are becoming sort of bombarded with pitch after pitch from different vendors saying, hey, we have this really cool AI tool, right? How do we help them sort of like vet those pitches for, really quality indicators of quality, right? So SETDA, we released a resource last month to sort of give ideas on, hey, here's some indicators that you should be looking for, questions that you should be asking of your vendor partners to make sure that only the highest quality tools, enter our classrooms, right? And then the third piece that becomes a challenge is, I think it's been a theme over the last couple of months, but just like having to navigate all these changes at the federal level, right? How can we make sure that, AI literacy, equitable and responsible uses of AI still become a central theme at the school and local levels, in light of all the things that are happening at the federal level, right? So those are things that we're continuing to figure out. I don't think I have all the answers yet, but I think those three are issues that we're thinking about right now: procurement, digital access, and just navigating things at the federal level. Yeah.
Okay, so similarly, what do you feel are some of the biggest opportunities that exist at this moment?
Yeah, I think I'll answer that question by harkening back to the three things that I talked about in the challenges question. The first being digital access, right? We put out a report in January called the Universal Connectivity Imperative, making an argument for state and federal policies that can help continue the momentum that we've been building around this issue of digital access, right? We took stock of some of the great work that local, state, and industry partners as well have led in the past 4 or 5 years to bridge the digital access divide from home. And made some recommendations around, hey, how can we continue building on that, right? So there's some policy recommendations around 5 central policy goals in that report. One around broadband and devices, digital skills, the inclusivity of platforms and tools that we use, accessibility, and some technical assistance around cybersecurity and things like that. So I think, again, we've done some really great work in the last 4 or 5 years, especially at the state and local level. How can we continue building on that momentum? I think that's a question to be thought out a little more. Second, I think I mentioned the challenges around procurement and the resource that we put out. So our organization last year partnered with a group of organizations like ISTE, COSIN, CAST, Innovate EDU, One Ed Tech, and Digital Promise to define those like quality indicators for any edtech tool, including AI, powered tools, right? Safe, inclusive, evidence-based, usable, and interoperable, right? And our organization made a commitment to develop a tool that state leaders can use to give guidance to districts on procurement of different edtech tools. So last month, we published a guide that our state members can use to in any sort of like procurement vehicle, whether it be an RFP or not, some model questions that they can put in there to, talk to their vendor partners about, how are you making sure that your tool is usable? How is it interoperable, and all the other criteria. We gave them examples of third-party validators that they might be looking for as they vet different edtech tools for quality, right? That it's provided by a lot of different trusted organizations out there. And we sort of told stories of our state members that are doing some good work around edtech procurement. We told how Connecticut has a centralized platform at the state level that gives guidance to districts on, hey, these tools meet our criteria for those that meet our privacy standards, right? We talked about how states like Oregon, because they're a lot more local control, gave guidance for districts on, hey, here's some key things that you should be looking for that are sort of aligned to the 5 edtech quality indicators that the consortium organizations defined as well. So that's a resource that we put out there. And then the opportunity on the federal changes place, I think this is a space for a lot of like associations like SETDA to figure out how can we fill in the void that's created if there are changes at the federal leadership level, right? How can we continue to have people meet together to exchange ideas on policies and practice, right? Well, now was the U.S. Department of Education. Yes, there was the policy work that we did to sort of drive change, but I think like 90% of the work that we did at the federal level was just around like convening people and defining a shared vision during those convening opportunities. So how can associations fill that role to create a safe space where people can exchange ideas around policy and practice in AI or whatnot, and still work towards a common vision. So that's an opportunity for the field as well. Yeah.
What are the ethical implications of using AI in education, particularly concerning student data privacy, algorithmic bias, and the potential for increased digital divides?
Yeah, I think these are big challenges that like everyone's trying to figure out on an iterative basis. But I think the large umbrella thing that I'll say is something that a longtime mentor of mine has told me, right? Technology, whether it be in education or not, is just a tool, right? Just as a hammer is in your toolbox. It just helps you accelerate any practice that you're doing. It can accelerate good practices, and it can also accelerate bad practices, right? So how do we make sure that we're steering the conversation towards those good practices, right? In the previous administration, the Office of Civil Rights worked with the Office of Ed Tech to put out some guidance around what those bad practices might be, right? Whether it be false positives that are identified when you're using quote unquote AI detection tools, or biases when you're identifying students for special programs and things like that. So I think I recommend people taking a look at that resource that OCR put out, because it does give examples of those like questionable practice that we should be driving ourselves away from. So I think there have been changes in the federal websites right now that so it might be a little bit hard to find, but SETDA did download them so that it can be accessible to other people. So I think that is a good document to start those conversations around those themes that you just mentioned. Yeah.
How can educational institutions ensure that students develop critical thinking and problem-solving skills in an age where AI can provide readily available answers?
Yeah, I'll talk about some of the recommendations that the National Ed Tech Plan makes, and then also talk about what we talked about in our Universal Connectivity Imperative Report. In the National Ed Tech Plan, one of the first recommendations that we make for schools and districts is to start by defining what a portrait of graduate is. Like, when students exit the K-12 system, what are some key skills and competencies that they should have to succeed in today's economy and society, right? I know that we've highlighted examples of some districts already, using this practice. Like, I think Northern Cass School District is their name in North Dakota, that was able to basically undergo a district-wide transformation by defining a portrait of a graduate and aligning professional development and curricula towards that. So that might be something that educational institutions might be able to do to make sure that AI doesn't become just a crutch, right? It becomes, as I mentioned in the previous question, a tool to build students' core competencies as defined in a portrait of a graduate. So that's another thing. And then in the Universal Connectivity Imperative Report that we released back in January, we made a couple of other more specific recommendations of what system-level institutions and leadership could do. One is developing a shared ed tech plan, right? That used to be a thing, but based on our trends report, we see that states are less and less requiring districts to develop a centralized ed tech plan. So how can we make sure that districts in developing an ed tech plan can incorporate like a portrait of a graduate there, right? Making sure that professional development for educators is emphasized in that plan, right? One question that we ask states year after year is like, what are some of the biggest sort of unmet needs in your state? Yes, cybersecurity is like the perennial sort of priority for everyone. But between 2023 and 2024, when we see the item that saw the greatest growth in states saying they're concerned about, it was actually professional learning. So how can we make sure that professional learning for educators, ongoing coaching is a big priority for states to make sure that educators are equipped to help students with those core competencies and skills. So I think those two things I'll mention, the NETP and some of the recommendations that we made in UCI. Yeah. So another thing that I want to add is schools have a lot on their plates right now, right? And expecting them to take on one more thing, like, training students on how to use AI responsibly, ethically, can be a challenge to a lot of small districts and rural districts as well. So some of the recommendations that we make in our UCI report are, how can we think about this from an ecosystems perspective? What's the role of other community institutions that can partner with schools to provide additional supports, right? We see in states like Washington, for example, giving out digital navigator grants to districts to make sure that they can, recruit personnel who can help parents understand how to use different tools from home, right? So how can we make sure that institutions other than schools can also be part of this journey as we equip students for this new economy and society? So I think that's something that I want to wrap up with. Like, yes, there's a critical role that schools and districts can play, but it's also a role that a lot of institutions within communities can play as well. And I think there's a shared vision around that. So that's something that I wanted to mention. Yeah.
Well, Soo Song, Director of Projects and Initiatives at SETDA, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's a great conversation. Yeah.